Stanley Kubrick's 1968 science fiction film 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of the most popular and widely acclaimed films of all time. Multiple commentators on the film have noted its philosophical themes, connecting the film to the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, to Christian motifs, or to the Odyssey of Homer. In this video though, I want to make the argument that none of these approaches have discovered the deeply original spirituality which is at the core of 2001. While 2001 may be inspired by many of these influences, its spirituality is not based on any existing philosophy or religion, but in a thoroughly modern belief in the universe, and in the evolution of humanity towards acquiring greater power and self-understanding. By using the term Odyssey in the title of his film, Kubrick invokes the ancient Greek poet Homer's tale, the Odyssey, which describes the tortuous travels of Odysseus, or Ulysses, to reach his home, the island of Ithaca. From this, it follows that a space odyssey must be the tortuous tale of humanity itself, long confined to this pale blue dot, finally venturing out towards the stars, which are our true home, in search of meaning and perfection. But this spiritual odyssey does not begin when we leave Earth behind. Instead, it begins right here on Earth, in the prehistoric past, when the monolith first appears in front of the apes. Touching the monolith gives apes the mental acumen to use bones as weapons. The apes, before coming in contact with the monolith, are living a stagnant life of bare survival and ceaseless conflict between equally placed tribes. The monolith is then accessed only by one chosen tribe, destined for greater things, like the biblical tribes of Israel. The weapons that this tribe develops after touching the monolith allows them to conquer all the other tribes. And then, in one of the most famous time jumps of all time, the bone weapon, triumphantly thrown in the air by the victorious ape, transforms into an American spacecraft. This highlights that given the context of the ongoing Cold War in 1968 when this film was released, the Americans could be seen as the conquering tribe, with the space race as a part of its weaponry. The weapon now has also transformed from one that could kill a single enemy to one capable of mass extinction. Humanity in this period is again, like the apes from which it evolved, represented as stagnant, having completed its domination over nature and no longer capable of new discoveries. While Kubrick spent several scenes demonstrating the immense technological prowess of this period, he also demonstrates the failure of language as a means of communication in our society. Heywood Floyd's call with his daughter, due to its being mediated by the screen, is devoid of the warmth of genuine human connection. And so, the next appearance of the monolith calls for going to Jupiter and beyond the infinite, beyond the barriers of language and the rational mind, into an ineffable realm where genuine spiritual connection becomes possible. This is where the final monolith appears, signifying a final evolutionary transformation from the human to the star child. The final section of the film then appropriately uses the title Beyond the Infinite, in stark contrast to the earlier section which used 18 months later. This, I argue, is a deliberate contrast to demonstrate the irrelevance of time once it is transcended in the final section. Similarly, just before his rebirth into the star child, the elderly astronaut David Bowman breaks a glass, which is often interpreted as the end of his dependence on the body, on food, and eventually on matter itself. And so, in the final contact with the monolith, there is no physical touch, unlike other instances, because he no longer needs to touch things in order to reach them. Here, the dying Bowman simply reaches out towards the monolith, in a manner reminiscent of Michelangelo's creation of Adam. Given that the star child has transcended time, and with it also death, and attained immortality, it can be argued that while the previous sections of the film discuss humanity's eventual conquest of space, from the usage of the bone as a weapon to the colonization of the moon, the final section deals with the conquest of time. Space is deconstructed when Bowman appears in two places simultaneously, time when he ages 100 years in a minute. The appearance of the monolith is the only constant that unites the three acts of the film, should we then view the monolith itself as the hero of 2001? The film can only be understood when human consciousness itself is seen as the hero of the film. 2001 tells the tale of the evolution of human consciousness through the course of time by the means of the monolith. Another theme integrating the three acts of the film is the fortunate fall. The fortunate fall is a romantic rejection of the biblical narrative of the fall of man. It evolved from late Christian poetry, which was written as a response to the Bible's condemnation of man as a fallen creature through the original sin of Eve tasting the fruit of the tree of knowledge. But instead of banishment from Eden, the theory of the fortunate fall maintains that, as the name suggests, the fall of man was actually fortunate for us. This is because our disobedience was the first necessary step for our evolution towards a higher innocence. Eve's disobedience then marks the beginning of human curiosity, which, in turn, is the force behind all human pursuits for knowledge, scientific or spiritual. So, each touching of the monolith in the film is a result of our desire for knowledge, much like the tasting of the fruit of the tree by Eve. Each time the monolith is touched symbolizes a stage of evolution, where our disobedience to God, sparked as a result of our natural curiosity for knowledge, leads to a higher life. The romantic idea of the fortunate fall was exemplified in the poetry of William Blake, who in turn derived it from earlier Christian poets like John Donne and George Herbert, but particularly John Milton, whose famous epic poem, Paradise Lost, represents the idea of the fortunate fall in its last two books. The fortunate fall acts as a justification for the sin of Adam and Eve. The idea is that Adam fell, and so we have Christ, who will not only renew humanity, but take us to a place higher than we were in Eden, before the fall of man. And so, the fall of man was fortunate. William Blake, in particular, gave an interesting interpretation to the fortunate fall, connecting it to the innocence of childhood. He argued that the innocence of childhood was unearned and without a conscious effort, just like the innocence of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. This unearned innocence is in contrast to what he calls the higher innocence, gained on experience, which will be the innocence of a humanity redeemed by Christ. After Bowman transforms into the Star Child, his decision to return to the Earth from space reflects Blake's higher innocence, gained through experience. In contrast, Nietzsche, in his famous theory of the Übermensch or overman, predicts that humanity is on the precipice of a transformation into a new free-thinking species, not bound by the chains of traditional morality. The importance of Nietzsche to 2001 is signified by Kubrick utilizing Richard Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra, inspired by Nietzsche's book of the same name, as the opening track to the film. But I wish to argue that it is unlikely that Nietzsche's Übermensch can represent the higher innocence of the Star Child. This is because the Übermensch was ultimately a moral concept and not one which encompassed a Darwinian physical evolution. For Nietzsche's thoughts on evolution, instead, his early work, The Untimely Meditations, proves helpful. This work, however, was written before Nietzsche came up with his theory of the Übermensch. Here, in his essays on Arthur Schopenhauer and David Strauss, Nietzsche argued that humanity is ultimately a more subtle beast of prey. Most of the wars, victories, and other confused mingling of humans is a continuation of animality. Instead, he maintained that only three types of individuals, the philosophers, artists, and saints, were true men who were no longer animals. Only in creating these epoch-making individuals does nature reach its goal. So, Nietzsche rejected a linear theory of evolution for the whole species, preferring instead something reminiscent of Thomas Carlyle's great man theory, where history is simply the recounting of the works of great men, and the ordinary person's life has no place in it. In fact, Kubrick was even directly asked in an interview if Nietzsche's philosophy was the metaphysical message behind 2001, but he avoided mentioning Nietzsche in his response. Instead, he highlighted that 2001 was a non-verbal experience, which would be spoiled by verbalized pigeonholing into a particular philosophy, and should instead directly penetrate the subconscious of the viewer through its emotional and philosophic content. More importantly, Kubrick asked us to think of the myriad mysteries of cosmic intelligence and confirmed that the God concept is essential to understanding 2001. This God concept does not conform to the traditional anthropomorphic image of God in the world's religions, but instead appears through the mysterious entity behind the monolith. So Kubrick's concept of God is ultimately based on the evolutionary superiority of one species over another. He believed that a species could eventually become so advanced that they would transcend matter and become beings of pure energy and spirit. Kubrick argued that these beings must be gods to humans, just like humans must be gods to an ant. Kubrick in this interview also advocated for a transhumanist philosophy, a philosophy which believes that humanity will evolve beyond its current limitations, by arguing that death is ultimately a disease which would be overcome by us in our technological progress. Finally, Kubrick affirms an interpretation based on the higher innocence of Blake's poetry. This is because in a discussion on nihilism in this interview, Kubrick said that while a child, after observing death and pain in the world, may lose the pure sense of wonder with which he is born, he may still forge a fresh sense of purpose and affirmation, rediscovering his sense of wonder, which is now shaped into something far more enduring. This is the higher innocence of a rediscovered childhood. The star child, in its return to Earth, acts as an antidote to the nihilism caused by a godless world. In this part of the video, I'm going to discuss some commonalities between the thoughts presented by Kubrick in his interview with the evolutionary theology of the Indian mystic and poet Sri Aurobindo. When I was researching for this video, I could not find anyone who had discussed this similarity before me. The vision of evolution in 2001 is focused on human consciousness. A transformation in human consciousness can be seen each time someone in the film touches the monolith. This resembles the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, who argued that in parallel to the Darwinian physical model of evolution, a spiritual evolution of consciousness or involution also takes place. A brief overview of Sri Aurobindo's philosophy would be helpful here. In his life-affirming philosophy of integral or realistic Advaita, a modern interpretation of the ancient Advaita Vedanta philosophy of India, Sri Aurobindo argued that our lives have a uniquely collective purpose, the spiritual evolution of all beings. Brahman, the absolute principle of existence in Vedanta philosophy, is present equally in all beings, which are continuously evolving towards the realization of their absolute nature. Creation is the story of Brahman, this infinite unity, deliberately losing itself in Maya, the visible world, which appears as a chaos of multiplicity. As this multiplicity evolves, it becomes a discord of forces and beings which seek to recover their lost unity, their lost oneness, their lost Eden. 2001 then can be seen as the tale of humanity's quest for rediscovering its absolute unity, from its tortuous history of tribal infighting and war to the final war against the machine, all leading to a rebirth of the species as the spiritual star child that transcends the limits of matter and duality. Another commonality between the film and Sri Aurobindo's philosophy is Sri Aurobindo's emphasis on direct knowledge without language or even the rational mind acting as an intermediary. This is echoed by Kubrick in his emphasis that 2001 should have a subconscious impact on the viewer. In a chapter in his magnum opus, The Life Divine, titled Knowledge by Identity and Separative Knowledge, Sri Aurobindo argued that our everyday surface cognition could directly know only its own essential existence. We must therefore recognize external objects and individuals as existing separately from us. From this, it follows that an individual can never completely know another, because the only way to completely know another person would be to become them. The failure of language as an imperfect means of communication is simply a symptom of this broader existential malady of the human condition. Kubrick similarly chose to limit dialogue in his film to only where it was essential, choosing instead to communicate through images alone. This follows the above discussion of Sri Aurobindo, who argued that the rational mind, by virtue of being an intermediary between the subject and the object, only impedes a higher and more intuitive way of knowing. A utopian vision for humanity for both Kubrick and Sri Aurobindo must involve transcending the limitations of the rational mind. In this video, I have analyzed the spirituality behind 2001: A Space Odyssey through multiple lenses: the fortunate fall of Christian poetry, as well as the philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche and Aurobindo. But I believe that Kubrick's own understanding of 2001 as a post-linguistic experience, as well as his scientific secular spirituality, which is built upon a faith in human evolution beyond our current limitations, is not adequately captured by the works of any existing philosopher or religion. This marks 2001 as, in my opinion, not just one of the greatest films of all time, but as a monumental work of art in the history of humanity.